It can offer somebody to not feel like they're all alone.
Yeah.
It can offer them an opportunity to maybe not feel as ashamed or guilty for the feelings that they're having. They know that somebody else has gone through something similar.
Yeah.
But when it comes to only relying on your own lived experience, I feel like you're going to come up short.
Yeah.
At some point, because all you have to go on is the things that have been helpful for you. There isn't a broader perspective on the wider variety of tools that might be helpful for them.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim, the podcast. We are back from our holiday hiatus. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I have an amazing conversation with Meg and Hale coming up where we're going to dive into the conversation of therapy versus coaching. So stay tuned for that. But first, I want to check in and see how you're doing. How are you doing now that it is 2019? Hopefully you had a chance to go through my Worthy Women Rise Year in Review workbook. It was a 56-page workbook that I had available for you all to download for free over the past 3 or so weeks. I hope that really supported you in closing your 2018. It's a little gift that I like to give to all of you in my community. So if you didn't get a chance to grab it this year, just stay tuned because I will be doing it again next year. It felt really good for me to close energetically 2018 and for me to set my visions on 2019. And one of the things that I've been sitting a lot with is this podcast. You know, one of the questions I like to ask myself is this still in alignment? Does this still feel good? Am I still really excited about this? And if not, it doesn't mean I'm just going to throw it away. It's just an opportunity for me to get curious as to why not and what changes need to be made in order for me to get excited again. And so as I was thinking about the podcast in December and sending out tons of emails out to well-known names in the industry, excited to get them on the podcast, I started to become a little demoralized. I wasn't receiving quite the response I had hoped to receive from these bigger named people. And I started to fall into a spiral of who cares about Reclaim if I don't get these big named people. If I don't get people that are recognizable in the industry, will anyone even hear this podcast? Will anyone even care about Reclaim? And I had to drill back down into the mission of the podcast. And I wrote down one afternoon that the mission of Reclaim is to have intimate conversations with women who have something interesting to say for people who are paying attention. And when I wrote down that mission, it reinvigorated my commitment to this podcast, which is intimate conversations. It's the conversations that matter, not the size of the audience of the people who are having the conversations. I care more about the quality of the conversation, not how many followers they have on Instagram. And I realized that I had forgotten this mission. I had gotten my values got a little confused. And yes, I've had bigger names on this podcast. I've had people like Jessamine Stanley and Erica Hard and Elizabeth Cronus McLaughlin. And these are, well-known people. But I didn't reach out to them because they were well-known, but because I had a very interesting and exciting thing I wanted to talk to them about. So having that mission, having that value system set back up is exciting for me because it means that I have a new lens or a refreshed lens for me to be navigating when I reach out to guests for the podcast. This is my commitment to you. I want every conversation that you listen to for me to have been really excited by. I want to be really excited by every conversation. And so if I do an interview and I'm not excited about that interview, I'm not going to air it. And I'm going to be unapologetic about that. If I'm not 100% excited to promote it, if I'm not 100% excited for you to listen to it, I'm not going to air it. Because I want this podcast to be intentional. It's not about just getting my name out there. It's about offering a listening experience that means something to you, that moves you in a significant way. This podcast is for you. And so I want to thank all of you who have supported me on Patreon this past year. Patreon is a way for just as little as $1 a month that you get to put your support behind this podcast. And with that money, I hire people to support me in editing the podcast. I hire people to support me with the visuals of the podcast. It basically allows me to keep this podcast going. And so I am endlessly appreciative of every single one of you who have put even just $1, because even just $1 makes a difference. And if you want to contribute to the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky to learn more about that platform and see if that's something that you want to contribute to. Okay, so now that I have my mission revitalized, now that I'm back focused and I'm excited about Reclaim, I want to talk about one more thing. January is a very special time for me because for the past 4 Januaries, I have opened the doors to my signature program, Worthy Women Rise, and this year is no different. So doors officially open for my signature group program at the end of the month, but right now I'm doing what I'm calling a soft launch, which is if you go to worthywomenrise.com and you sign up for the waitlist, you'll get a link where you can put a deposit and hold your space for the program right now. I'm excited. I feel like, with everything coming up in our culture, this is the greatest opportunity right now to really step into our worth in a whole new way. And the way that I relate to the worthiness wound, the way that this program goes is that we slowly start to unpeel the layers of everything that we've been taught from our culture, from our parents, from our life experiences that tell us that we are inadequate and that we are enough. And instead of making an enemy of our worthiness wound, instead of shaming it or belittling it or problematizing it, we learn how to find the wisdom in the wound. We learn how to tune into the needs of our body, our spirit, our hearts on a different level. We develop a relationship with ourselves that's based on a mutual self-respect versus what I often see around this time of the year is this idea of resolutions and goal setting that kind of dehumanize our needs and expects perfection of ourselves. So if you're navigating perfectionism and comparitis, if you're struggling with feeling worthy enough to put your project or business out there, if you're feeling like you're just ready to step into a whole new level of who you are, like putting that out into the world, I invite you to consider Worthy Women Rise. So again, you can learn more about the program at worthywomenrise.com. You're going to be hearing more about it in the next couple weeks, and then particularly when doors open at the end of the month. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so let me bring Megan on, and we're going to talk about coaching versus therapy. As many of you know, I have been getting my master's in clinical psych here in Los Angeles. I'm actually entering my 4th quarter. It's a 2-year program, and I'm almost through year 1. And I've been learning a lot about what it means to be a therapist and what it means to hold space in a therapeutic way. And as a coach for the past, 7 years, I've been pretty immersed in the coaching world, and I'm very familiar with what it means to be a coach. So it's been really cool to learn this whole new industry of mental health and also to marry the knowledge that I currently have on coaching with the knowledge I'm getting about clinical psychology. Megan, my guest here today, has taken the opposite route. So she started off as a therapist and has moved into the coaching realm. And so together we explore the differences between these two industries as well as similarities. Because what these two industries don't want to admit is that there actually are more similarities than differences. But the differences are really important to know. It's important to know as practitioners in either industry, and it's also important to know as consumers so that you are getting the best support that you need to navigate whatever is coming up for you in your life. Okay, so let me read to you Megan's bio. Megan Hale is the founder of Wild and Holy, a virtual community of coaches, leaders, helpers, and healers committed to having their own breakthroughs so they can show up braver and help others have their own. As a leadership coach with a brain for business, she brings soul and strategy for growth that feels good and momentum that's grounded in ease. She's the podcast host of The Enoughness Revolution, a conversation on worthiness, and Wild and Holy Radio, a conversation on bravery. You can find her leading transformational group programs, life-changing retreats, or pouring her head and heart into clients one-on-one who are ready for sustainable, scalable, and meaningful growth. You can learn more about Megan at meganhale.com. And if you go into the show notes, you can grab her business shifting good, better, best goal method. The link to that is in the show notes. All right, let me bring Megan on. And while you're listening to this conversation, I want you to think if you are a coach or a therapist, what your relationship has been like with the industry, what you see as similarities between coaching and therapy. And as a consumer, so this goes for all of us, I would love to know, what is your relationship with your own mental health? Are you getting the right support? What does that mean for you to get support? What does mental health even mean to you? And what does it look like to develop a mental health strategy that is in alignment with your best self? Hello, Megan Hale. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. It's so good that you're here. I'm so happy to finally get a chance to interview you.
I'm excited to be here too. You've been on my podcast like I don't even know how many times.
A million. No. But it's interesting. I have a list of people that I want to have on the podcast, but sometimes I wait to reach out to them until there's this draw. Does that,
Yes.
They're talking about something that's boom, that's what I want to talk about. And I feel like that's what happened with us. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while, and then we got into the conversation of mental health in the coaching industry, and I'm like, you know what, you are the perfect person to be talking about this. Would you be interested in joining the conversation on Reclaim? And you said yes, and here we are.
Here we are. Let's do this.
Let's do this. So a little bit about your background and experience first, just to contextualize the conversation. So you went and got your master's in clinical psych, yes, and became a therapist. And then you pivoted and went into coaching. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so you and I have had completely opposite paths, which I love so much.
Yep.
So I think I was one of those, I guess, fortunate ones in a way. When I was 15, I knew that I was just fascinated by human behavior, really understanding what makes us tick, understanding our drives and our passions and all those things. And I remember sitting in my first psychology class in high school of this is it. This is what I want to do. And I never really wavered from that path. And I think I was really gravitated towards the field of psychology to understand myself on a deeper level, to do my own healing. And it just kind of turned and blossomed into this really beautiful career for me. So I got the graduate degree, did the supervision, which they don't tell you about all the time when you sign up for graduate school, by the way. And really just saw that path all the way through. I had a childhood dream of opening up a private practice and really helping people find their own happiness and well-being and healthy, happy relationships and creating thriving lives. And I love that work very much. And I also had some other personal life stuff that it wasn't. So when I opened up my private practice, it was my first taste of entrepreneurship. And it was really hard to see myself leaving entrepreneurship. And I'm married to a military man. So I knew that we were going to be moving every 2 to 3 years. And I also knew that it wasn't completely feasible for my sanity to go and open up a new business every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's when I also started getting curious about the kind of clients that I was attracting into my private practice were really coming to me with depression and anxiety and relationship issues. And it never failed. Once we got into the work, there was really an authenticity issue of not living true to their own values and struggling to set boundaries, to maintain boundaries, and to really live into their fullest expression. So I started getting curious, if other people were struggling with that, but maybe not presenting with mental health issues.
Yeah.
And that's when I found coaching, and I was like, oh, there's this whole other world out there too, which was really exciting to me. So that's kind of my journey from there to here.
Yeah. And obviously my journey is the exact opposite. I've been in coaching and now I'm getting my master's in clinical psych. And the reason why I reached out to you is because, in my grad school studies, I'm learning more and more, obviously, about mental health and the ways that we, as clinicians, need to be watching out for and developing the right skill set to address these issues. And I'm reckoning with the fact that I didn't learn any of this in the coaching world, which you're not technically supposed to learn. Right. You're not addressing mental health issues as a coach. You don't have the accreditations, whatever. knowledge for how to deal with it. But if I don't even know what to look out for as a coach, then I could be on some level causing harm. And so I reached out to you kind of in this feelings of like, what do we do? Like, how do we as coaches, how are we making sure that we're responsible for people's mental health when most of us don't have any sort of education about mental health?
I know. I think it's a major, major gap. And I think as like coaching continues to grow as a field, as a profession, like right now it's not regulated.
Right.
And that I think is an issue that I think will eventually come to a head, that coaching will require licensure. It will require some sort of ethical governing body, because even though you might not be coaching with the intent of helping people through anxiety or depression or trauma, that doesn't mean that you're not going to experience it or come across it in your work with clients.
Exactly.
And really knowing your lines of practicing ethically when you're holding space for people is a big thing. But I think the struggle, though, like we've talked about, is, you know, with a mental health background, you know the signs and symptoms that you're looking for.
Exactly.
When it comes to clinical depression, clinical anxiety, trauma work, PTSD, those types of backgrounds. And as a coach, that's just not part of your academic training at all, or certification training at all.
Yes.
So we have so many people who are doing the right thing and going and getting training as coach and getting that certification, but in their actual training process, you know, I've never gone through a coach certification without the mental health background. Yeah. So I don't know if this isn't talked about at all. In most coach trainings. I know in mine, I went through a specific certification for people who had a mental health background. So my certification was more or less focused on discerning between, knowing the difference between counseling and coaching.
Yes.
And being really clear on what it is that you're providing and what you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I'm continuing to wrestle with, because I'm not clear right now. Listen, I'm not even halfway through my program yet, so I have some time, but I'm not clear right now how I want to shift and change my business to accommodate for this master's. I don't know if I just want to use what I'm learning in my coaching, or if I want to open up a private practice. I don't know. But what I do know is that we as coaches right now have a responsibility for each other. And while we're not understanding the very real lived experiences of most people, which most people experience some type of mental health issue in their lifetime, then we're doing a huge disservice to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that gets really mushy is, you know, especially as you start practicing psychotherapy and you start learning theories and putting those things into practice, you're going to find that there's a lot of carryover between a lot of the coaching modalities and specific psychotherapy modalities too, which makes it even grayer.
Yes.
You know, because when we're here holding space for somebody to step into their fullest expression, like we're dealing with mindset blocks. We're dealing with how somebody perceives themselves, perceives the world. Like it has that strong psychology component.
Yeah. I actually feel a little robbed in some ways, because I was told when I entered the coaching world, listen, I did not do therapy. So I didn't know this, right? I didn't have any context for what therapist does versus what coaches does. But I was told that therapist focuses on the past, coaching focuses on the future. Clear delineation, like black, white. This is therapy, this is coaching. And now the more I'm learning about therapy and psychology, the more I'm realizing that that's complete bullshit. First off, as coaches, so many coaches, not all coaches, but so many coaches dive into your past, because your past creates who you are right now. And then so many therapists focus on pragmatic steps forward.
Yes.
So it's almost like coaching made itself into an industry by making boundaries that aren't really there.
Yeah, and I think that the field of psychotherapy, it hasn't caught up to our modern world.
Yes.
And I think that's a big reason why coaching has taken off in the way that it has, because it makes support more accessible to people, not necessarily financial, because I think that's a big gap in the coaching rates versus psychotherapy rates.
Yeah.
But as far as finding somebody that you connect to, that you feel safe with, that inspires you, like it's way easier, I think, to find a coach that way than it is to find a therapist. And that really is because of how it's set up. You know, as a psychotherapist, you are taught very, sternly to not self-disclose. It is not about you. You do not share your story. You do not share your perspective, your beliefs, any of those things.
Yes.
And coaching is a completely different. You're talking about being clear with your methods, being clear with your philosophies, your politics, like all of those things. It's literally like very opposite.
Yes. And what's so interesting, Megan, right, is that the very first thing that we learn as therapists is the therapeutic alliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
That what will absolutely create change within the client more than any other element is the relationship itself.
Yes, the rapport, for sure.
So that's what's so interesting is that with coaching, like seeing your stuff on social media, seeing what you do, seeing the program, seeing your voice through your posts, I'm more likely to reach out to you and feel like I have a relationship with you.
Absolutely.
Than me randomly going through the phone book or wherever I go to find a therapist, Google phone book. I'm aging myself here. No, I'm kidding. Like going through Google and like picking out a name and being like, oh, I guess this sounds good. And then just seeing what happens.
I know.
Yeah.
No, I get it. And I think the thing is I think that psychotherapy can actually learn a little bit from the coaching industry in that regards of how to really connect, but how to connect with the ideal client and that you can really truly help. But I think where it starts to shift is when you actually get into the coaching relationship or the psychotherapy relationship, it really does need to be about the client. And I think that is similar in both professions, right? It's just how the client is finding the person that's going to help them is way different. Could you imagine, like there's not even a coaching directory, like there's Psychology Today that you can go plug in your zip code and it'll pull up all the therapists. You can go through their profiles and kind of get a feel for this person looks sort of safe. Maybe I'll just set up a 15-minute consult. But with somebody who's in the coaching arena, they have so much content. Like you can really get a deep experience of who this person is before you even reach out.
Yeah. The other big difference that I see, is that the coaching sell point, right, is I've done it.
Yes.
I've healed myself through these means. And so now I know that I can heal you through these same means, right? Like it's worked for me, so now I'm going to teach you and it's going to work for you.
This is really, really hard for me. This is probably like my biggest bone to pick with the coaching industry. And I think this is where it also gets messy too, is that there are many people who are doing mentoring and consulting and calling it coaching. And these are two very different modalities because somebody who has a certain business success and who has done a lot, has a lot of experience, like, hey, I've done it. I can teach you what I have done to get here. Great. That's one thing. But if you're going to take your personal healing journey and let that be the end all be all for how somebody gets healed, that's not how healing works.
Right.
So that's like my biggest bone to pick with that particular issue, especially when we start getting into heavy hitters, like helping people heal from trauma, sexual abuse, any sort of something like that has a lot of layers to it. You get into family dynamic stuff, you add addiction onto that. Like this stuff becomes very complex that without proper training and an academic background, you truly do lack the perspective to really understand how all these things are interacting to guide somebody through their own healing process, because it's not about guiding somebody through your healing process.
Yes.
It's about holding space for them to go through theirs.
Yeah. And I see that word trauma. It's become the cool word. And I love actually that it's becoming more normalized. Anytime I see mental health words coming into the mainstream, people recognizing and understanding that, I do have lowercase depressive moods or episodes, maybe not uppercase depression. I like to differentiate them between lowercase and uppercase. Lowercase trauma, things that affected my childhood that maybe it wasn't one of those big T traumas. Maybe it wasn't abuse, neglect, but it still creates.
It was traumatic.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that people are starting to see that and relate to that. I think what breaks my heart is when I see coaches leverage mental health words like trauma without any form of expertise beyond their own lived experience, because your own lived experience is not enough to guide somebody else through theirs.
Yeah. I
It
agree.
doesn't, it helps 100%. And I think it sometimes in many ways makes you a more efficient healer when you have gone through your own thing. There's a
Oh,
lot
for
of
sure.
theorists that say that like you will be a better therapist if you have gone through depression. And I
Absolutely.
totally hear that. Whew, but when you are just coming from your lived experience, I think it's very, what's the word, irresponsible.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, and the least it's going to offer peer support. It can offer somebody to not feel like they're all alone. It
Yeah,
can offer them an opportunity to maybe not feel as ashamed or guilty for the feelings that they're having. They know that somebody else has gone through something similar.
yeah,
But when it comes to only relying on your own lived experience, I feel like you're going to come up short
yeah.
at some point, because all you have to go on is the things that have been helpful for you. There isn't a broader perspective on the wide or variety of tools that might be helpful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's just something that us coaches have to be cognizant of. We have to be aware of our limitations. And I think because the coaching industry doesn't inherently have limits, right? It doesn't have an ethical board. It doesn't have it. I think it makes us delusional. It makes us think that we have these superpowers, that we can do all these things for people. But really it's a grandiosity. It's a narcissism. I'm talking about mental health words. I'm going to spit them all out right now. It's like, it's us thinking that we are so much bigger and better than this antiquated therapy model. Like we have the answers. And I think that that's very cute, but also very harmful.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think the best therapists and the best coaches are very aware and very open, like vocal about, I
Yes.
don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the answers. I cannot be the expert on you.
Yes.
That's my job, to hold space for you to become the expert on you.
Yeah.
But when we do approach it from that perspective, yeah, I think you can get into dangerous territory. And also, for any coaches who are listening, who maybe you do hold space for people who are going through trauma, and maybe you are leaning heavily on your own. There's, I'm sure, coaching, like specific trainings for how to do coach-informed trauma work. Like we can up level
Yeah.
our skill set, we can up level our education, so we can truly hold better space for the people that we feel called to serve.
Yeah. And I feel like this is taking your craft seriously.
Absolutely.
If you are committed to being a good coach, then you have to take your craft seriously. And that
Yes.
means doing the education, doing the training. And I know that people say, well, finances are tight. And I really, really hear that. And there are so many ways. There are scholarships out there. There are, training programs where you pay, you can. There are options out there. Money is not the only, should not be the thing that stops you from really taking your craft seriously.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I
Yeah.
think the more you narrow your focus, you also start to become, the longer you're a coach too, I think you start to notice your areas where you could really stand to beefing up your skills or your tools. So we don't have to invest in all the things,
Yeah.
like just invest in one area of focus to start and see how that goes for a little while,
Yeah. Yeah. So, the other big difference between the coaching and therapy that I would love your thoughts on is the pricing structure.
Oh, yes.
A lot of business coaches in the coaching world say you can't be rich by charging per session.
Mm.
Right? So like fuck that model of charging per
Mm-hmm.
session. You do packages, you do bundles, you do, monthly containers, whatever it is you do, that's the only way that you can leverage your work. And then you see therapists, and their kind of answer to this is, well, we do it per session because we want people to have the autonomy and the sovereignty to leave when they fucking want to leave.
Yeah.
Right. And to not be tied into something.
Mm-hmm.
But so then the pricing structure is very different from
It's
charging,
way different.
tens of thousands of dollars for packages versus in therapy. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think, and this is one of the things that I think is coming from that antiquated, and this is coming also from in my personal opinion, a broken medical system in our country
Yes.
too, that when you go and open up a private practice, or you're working in a treatment center, wherever you're finding your work, and you are taking insurance panels, you are basically working for those insurance companies. They choose what they, like the top limit of what they will pay you.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's as much as you're able to get from those insurance companies. And you can also add an additional copay to your client.
Yep.
That they can pay out of pocket. But that industry is very, it has that structure component that does put a cap on what you can charge to keep mental health services available for most people. But even then, therapy outprices a lot of lower income communities too,
especially
right?
in larger cities. I mean, because therapists have to pay their overhead.
And from an ethical standpoint, as a therapist, and even just as a coach too, how many clients you can see on a monthly basis. Like, you can't be having like 60 clients a week. You can't even be having like 40, really.
Yeah.
For me, when I was in private practice, like 30 was a lot of people to see on an ongoing basis. Like, I felt much more in integrity with my ethics of doing 20, 22 clients a week, where I have that reserve to take care of my well-being too, because there's all this, you're holding a lot of stuff for people, depending on the nature of your work. And coaching is, it's like the Wild West out there when it comes to pricing. It really, really is. Mm-hmm. So it's a completely different model. And that was something that, I worked in substance abuse for my first 2 years as a therapist, and working in a 28-day rehab facility. And I just got such a bad taste in my mouth for how we had to work the system in order to get paid enough to keep the lights on, to keep that place open, to serve the people that it was needing. And it all felt so icky. And it's part of the system though. And that's what's so frustrating. And I think that's also what burns therapists out.
Oh yeah. I heard, talking about mental health and insurance, I have a friend whose partner has decided that he wants to go to a therapist, okay? But he wants to go through his insurance. So the way it works with his insurance is that first he has to go to his general practitioner. And he says to the doctor, I'm feeling sad and blue. And the doctor's like, great, do you want to see somebody? And he's like, yes. And so the general practitioner refers him to a psychiatrist. That's step 2. So then he has to see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist will determine if he should be in therapy, which, Megan, I didn't realize was a thing. I didn't realize that in some insurance plans, a psychiatrist held the door for whether or not you should get therapy from your insurance. And that is heartbreaking.
Well, it's also heartbreaking too, because for some people who medication isn't their first line, right? Or people who medication is their first line, right? And maybe and the way that I used to explain this to my clients is a medication, like if you're on a scale of 0 to 10 and your goal is to be a 10, a medication's only going to take you to maybe a 6 or 7. Like, it will have a limit. Yes. And the only way to close that gap is for you to do your own work. And that's where therapy comes in, right? Yeah. And so most of my clients were coming to do the therapy route first and then pursue medication if we weren't able to close that gap quick enough, or, all these different variables. And then other people entered into it from this other route of trying medication first and seeing how many symptoms that could alleviate, to know where does my work really in this and closing the gap for myself. Yeah. So the issue with going through even a psychiatrist, so this person has to call a general practitioner to get an appointment, however long that takes to get in. Then they have to go and see a psychiatrist, which this is going to be a very generalized statement, but psychiatrists usually take some time to get in to see. They have a long wait time. So you're more waiting. And then from that, you have to go and find a therapist that's in your network.
Yes.
Right? So make another referral, then get an appointment with that office, then get all your paperwork set to that therapist so they know they have everything they need to file your insurance.
Yeah.
So by the time it's all said and done, there's like 3 very big hoops that a client, person, a human has to jump through in order to get the help they need. Like that.
And the time that they have to take from work to make appointments. And so it gets worse, the story though. So the psychiatrist is like, well, why don't we put you on some medication? And the guy was like, I've done medication in the past. I don't think it really helped me. I'm really committed. I want to do talk therapy. He has no problems with medication. It's just, it didn't work for him in the past. He wants to try something else. And the psychiatrist is like, okay, well, I guess I can make, a referral to a therapist, but that's going to take time. Why don't you be on medication now until you're Oh, I know. I know. And I'm like, our country is over medicating people and not giving any tools to get out of that. Nothing wrong with medication.
It breaks me up.
So this guy finds out, learns that his insurance assigns him a therapist, which we just talked about at the top of the hour. The therapeutic alliance is the key, the goal, the answer to really making change in a therapy. And so now he doesn't even get to choose his therapist. And so when I was hearing this whole story, it broke my heart that this is the system that we live in. And so no wonder people are going to coaches. It's so much easier for me to be scrolling through Instagram, see, oh, look, you got your shit together, call you up and be like, I want to start working with you. And so all of the models need to be changed, because
I agree.
We need to make mental health more accessible, and without the insurance and medication being so intertwined in it. And at the same time, we have to beef up the coaching industry.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say this was surprising to me this year. Like, this year has been so many different areas of growth for me, but I'm married to somebody in the military. So we're on TRICARE insurance, which is a phenomenal insurance plan. And I was making a marriage counseling appointment for us this year. And I called the typical referral line, to ask for a referral. And they're like, oh, TRICARE alleviated a need for referral for mental health. You can just go ahead and, if they're in network, go ahead and make an appointment. And I was like, wow, that's so nice that you've alleviated a step that's making it easier for people to get access, that was actually a very big moment of hope for maybe some things are shifting here. So, but that's just one insurance company. Like, there's so many in our country.
And then there's a lot of therapists who don't take insurance because of this whole hassle and of this whole mess. And they,
I didn't take insurance when I was in private practice. I did do a sliding scale fee though. Yeah. So I would work with people, depending on their income. So to make it work for them. Yeah. And that was one of the best things I think I could have offered to help people who are in a lower economic status, but we're so committed to doing the work. Yeah.
And that's what I do respect about the therapy world, is that they really understand that charging a ridiculous amount of money or not having any sort of accessibility to your work is exploiting people's mental health. Yeah. I mean, truly, that's what you're doing. And I think the coaching world, even though it is still mental health, we don't say it, we don't talk about it, but it's still treating people's minds, making their lives better. That is mental health. By charging the amounts of money that I see some coaches charge, with less experience than therapists, with less academic, knowledge than therapists, it feels like and then they use words like trauma in their copy, right? It feels like.
Or then there's this whole level of shame that if you can't actually afford to invest, that you must not want it bad enough. Yes. And that is the shit that I'm like, this is not okay. And not to mention, I think that, because there's no cap in the coaching industry, I do think that it's maintaining systems of oppression 100%. In that way, because it's pricing so many different people out. And that
and then shaming them for something that's out of their control. And that's the other thing about the coaching industry, saying that everything is within your control. Mm-hmm. Everything is within your control. Yeah. In your power. So if you're not making enough money, that's a choice that you're making. If you're not blah, 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 it's a choice. It's a choice. And it's more nuanced. It's more complicated than that. And anytime I see this dichotomous thinking, black and white, it's a choice. It's control. All I'm hearing is that person feels wildly out of control in their lives. Because it's the only reason why you would want to control other people and believe that narrow-mindedness. But it's abundant in the coaching world, and it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And it took me a while. I've been in the coaching arena for 4 years now. And I remember first getting introduced to this industry and seeing some of this language and it was making me feel all kinds of just negative, toxic stuff. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of shame-based marketing out there. And how sad that is, because it's really playing on people's wounds and their hurt and their pain. And there's so many different ways that we can bring people to our work that doesn't have to leverage those kinds of things,
Yeah, I love that. Well, and something that you shared before we started recording is that you've been navigating your own mental health
Mm,
challenges this past year. I would love
yeah.
to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh my goodness, you guys. Okay, so just to break it all down for you, I had a baby January 3rd of this year. And then my husband went on deployment for 6 months, 3 weeks later. So I was a mom to two under two for about half of the deployment. And I had amazing family support for half of it, which I'm so grateful for. And then something happened about the midway point. Like, I'm a usually pretty upbeat, positive person. I like gratitude is like it's almost like a normal way that I look into the world. It's like a lens that I've
Yeah.
cultivated over time. And I just started to feel like even the daily tasks that used to not be hard became so incredibly heavy. Like, it felt
Mm.
like a 3,000-pound weight at times.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't feeling grateful at all. And then I felt guilty because I wasn't feeling grateful, right? Which is
Mm.
the other thing depression does. It's so hard. And, this wasn't my first experience with depression this year. And I'm grateful that I've gone through it before. It took me a while to notice what it was that was going on and why I was feeling this way and why things just felt so hard. Like, I felt like I was trudging through mud. That's how I felt. And it felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. Like, this isn't me. I knew it wasn't me. And then I started asking myself, like, Megan, you might be depressed.
Mm.
Like, think about all the things, like the life changes, like the shifts and so, like, all these things have happened. And you've been practicing all the tools that that help prevent depression.
Mm-hmm.
But girlfriend, I think you got snagged into a hole here.
Yeah.
And once I was able to acknowledge that for myself, like, everything kind of started to click into place, and I was able to see myself from a different perspective. And I think that's one of the benefits of going through depression before is, like, how to externalize it, some of the tools that start helping you work through it. But I
Yeah.
think you have to acknowledge it first.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something we don't talk about in the entrepreneurship space. Like, we don't talk about going through mental health issues. We don't talk about going through our dark times. That's not super marketable stuff to put out there, right?
Yeah.
And it can be very isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that so many of us go through our own stuff. I mean, we're humans. Of course we
Yeah.
do. We're going through breakups and life changes and babies and deaths. And I mean, we're having the full human experience. So of course we're
Yeah.
going to have anxiety and depression and all of these things.
It's interesting because I see so often we as coaches feel this need to add this caveat of like, I was going through this dark time because, like, I'm human and like I'm like everybody else, and I experienced this dark time, but they basically, we feel this need to contextualize it as
Yes.
like, I'm a really great person, don't get me wrong, I'm really, really good, but I just had this moment of not so good. And I'm reminding my clients who are entrepreneurs and reminding myself that, like, literally no one expects us to be perfect.
Do you know why I think we do that? Is I think there's such a stigma with mental health issues, and that there has been this dialogue that's built up over the years that if you're going through a mental health issue, you're not dependable, you can't be trusted, like, people don't know how much they can rely on you. And it's such a false narrative, because there are so many of us who are continuing to show up for our obligations in the best capacity that we can. We're still doing great work while also holding space for ourselves.
Yeah.
That also isn't to say that if you are in a place where you need extra support, that and holding space for people feels like too much. Like, that's an ethical call that I think that you need to make for yourself, just like we do in psychotherapy. Like, if you are going through a mental health crisis, you need to be attending to yourself, put the face mask on first, right? Before you go and step back into your work. So it's a delicate line and I think you really have to be radically honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. We do have this narrative that mental health means that you're weak.
Yes.
Because you should have been strong enough to be able to overcome this. Or we as a culture see, like, autism and ADHD, we see those as illnesses, as things that need to be fixed, as opposed to acknowledging the strength of neurodiversity. I mean, we still continue to see mental health as a problem and something that needs to be treated. When we even use those words in psychotherapy, you're in treatment, as opposed to seeing these things as information, as strengths, as, you know, when you got depressed, it's like that was information for you that your life was not in alignment, that somehow, because we're all human, like things slipped for you. And then it's like, oh, now I get to put things back together in a different way that makes more sense for my life right now and how it looks. And when we don't take mental health into consideration, I think our lives are very vapid. They're very shallow, because it is our mental diversity that gives us depth in our lives.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely agree. I think psychotherapy field, it tends to pathologize mental health issues, whereas coaching tends to normalize. So I find coaching to be, and this varies to a degree depending on what modality of psychotherapy you're receiving or practicing, but I find coaching to be a little bit more humanizing in that regard, versus psychology. It's like the whole main premise is to find the problem and diagnose it, right? Yeah. Versus coaching is let's really create like a vision for where you want to go, and we'll step into the blocks. We'll bust through those blocks as we approach them, as they show up.
Yeah, it's more strengths-based. It's almost like ignorance is in some way bliss, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because you don't know what to look out for, then you can just bulldoze ahead. And maybe sometimes that's what people need. I just think that like we shouldn't be promoting that too much, because
I think too that there's, you know, sometimes when we're going through a mental health issue or crisis or episode, you know, like I was this year, you know, I found myself telling myself like, well, there's something that you're not doing right, or there's some, like these tools, you've outgrown your tools, you need different tools, there's all these things that you're doing, or there's something that you're not doing. Like I was looking at inward, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we just go through hard stuff.
Yeah.
And that's part of our journey, is to go through a challenging time. And that doesn't mean that you're not doing it right or you're not doing it well enough. Like, this is how life is sometimes. And you do the best you can, and that is enough. Yeah. And that's the thing that it took me a long time to realize this past year, because I was doing I was self-coaching myself, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's also really freeing to say, you are doing everything you need to do. Yeah. It's just going to take some time to get out of this challenging season. Like there's so many different things going on. This is a normal response. And I think that's the thing. It's a disservice that we give to ourselves when we try to say this is an abnormal response, because we love to characterize and label emotions as either good, bad, normal, abnormal, right?
Yes.
When we can really see ourselves for what we're holding and what we're going through, it's like, well, anybody would probably be going through a challenging time through all these, right?
Yeah, and I think that is a very healthy normalization, particularly for people who've experienced or is experiencing more marginalization, you know, because the more marginalization you experience, the more trauma that you're carrying. And so, of course, it makes sense to normalize these things and to really recognize that your life is hard. And that doesn't take away from our freedom and our choices and our happiness to acknowledge that life is just hard sometimes.
Yes. And it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Yes. I love that so much. I haven't really told many people outside of my small bubble yet, because I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, but you'll appreciate this. So I'm entering analysis. So I'm going in.
Nice.
Yeah. It's so, for those of you who are not familiar with analysis, it's the origins of psychotherapy. Created by the famous Freud.
Freud himself.
But it's the image that we tend to have of psychotherapy, of you lying on the couch and that is actually analysis.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing analysis, which means I'm going in 4 times a week for 50 minutes. And right now I'm still at 3 times a week. So we're moving up to 4 times a week in January. We're building it up. And let me tell you, there is nothing like talking about your stuff for 50 minutes every day, you know, for weeks on end, for you to
intensive.
Really have a whole different understanding of mental health and just how wild our thoughts are, our patterns, the behaviors that we do. And it's
the complexities of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is such complex, like when you start to get into the psyche and just the emotional landscape that we all have.
Yeah.
the way we perceive the world, the way we perceive events, ourselves in it. I mean, it is just beyond fascinating to me. It really is.
Yeah. And that's so great that you're continuing to bring that fascination of, psychology into your work as a coach. I think that that's what gives you so much depth in your work and allows you to really reach women in a really potent way.
Thank you, Thais.
Yeah, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, for getting real and vulnerable and sharing your shit. I mean,
of course.
It's, we do it, I think, somewhat easier, but like still, it's kind of a big deal that we're normalizing by talking about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm excited to see you move through the psychotherapy field, because I think that you're going to be a key person in helping to shift and bring these two worlds together, because you've been in the coaching world for so long. Like, this industry, the things that are missing. And now as you're getting this other level of education, academic training and perspective, I think that, we can really join forces. I mean, not just me and you, I'm talking about like as a collective of like, how can we quality improve the services and the spaces that we're providing for people and making it more accessible, and like really starting to heal some of this systemic stuff that is really just holding us back.
Oh, you painted a big picture. I love it.
I know. I'm sorry, but I'm ready. I can see the possibility.
I love it. I agree. I think that there could be some really beautiful things in the world, So thank you for painting that for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my love. Anything else? Any final thoughts to wrap up this conversation?
No, I've just appreciated you bringing this conversation to the world and inviting me to come and talk with you about it. And just for anybody out there who is going through a mental health episode or a challenge this year, I just want you to know you're not alone. This is very, very common. I mean, I think, oh my gosh, I don't want to say any bad statistics, but I mean, anxiety is very, very common in our culture. Depression is right up there too. There's so many common issues that we're all facing. And I think that we feel very isolated and alone when we're not talking about them, because we feel like we're the only ones, and you're not. Promise, I'm right here with you.
Yeah, same. Right there with you. Thank you, Megan, so much.
Thank you.